I'm Tim Monroe, and this is what I really want to talk about. There's something fascinating about every single one of us. Everybody has a passion and a story to tell, something that lights them up. Every week I sit down with interesting people and we talk about the things that really matter to them and to all of us. It might be funny, it might be weighty, it might be weird. It's what I really want to talk about. My guest today is Dr. Chad Berry. Chad is a husband, a dad, and a grandfather. He is the Vice President for Alumni Communications and Philanthropy at Berea College and holds the Goode Professorship in Appalachian Studies as a professor of history. Previously, he has held the positions of Academic Vice President and Dean of the Faculty, as well as the Director of the Lloyd-Jones Appalachian Center. He has also served as a President of the Appalachian Studies Association. He holds a BA in American Studies from Notre Dame, an MA in Folk Studies from Western Kentucky University, and a PhD in History from Indiana University. Dr. Berry has authored, edited, or co-edited 4 books, including Southern Migrants, Northern Exiles, which maybe we'll talk a little bit about today, published by the University of Illinois Press, which examines the migration of millions of white Southerners to the Midwest during the 20th century. And through his work and his love of travel, Chad has visited more than 45 countries. Chad, welcome. What do you really want to talk about today?
Thank you, Tim. I would like to talk about place, placelessness, and, if we have time, displacement.
Okay. Place, placelessness, and displacement. Okay. So let's do something first before we're going to dive into all that. But why don't you tell us a bit about your journey? So in other words, not to be too cute about this, but what place do you come from? And how did you get to this place where you are today?
It started for me when I was a kid, and I can remember my grandparents who were from Tennessee, rural Tennessee, always going back to Tennessee if somebody sneezed, hiccuped, or was hospitalized. I mean, they were there. It was a very long trip back then because it was pre-interstate.
Where were you, though? Where were you?
I was raised in northern Indiana.
Okay.
Because they actually had to leave that place that they revered and loved because they were starving. And so I would always want to go with them. And sometimes I did. Often my parents would let me if it were summer.
Right.
And I think later, when I was a middle schooler, I was a little bit embarrassed about my grandparents, if I were honest. They were country people. My grandfather had a third-grade education because his father died at 28 of typhoid fever, a disease of the poor.
Okay.
His mother woke him up after the funeral and said, "You can't go to school today. You have to come with me to the fields because if we lose our crop, we will die."
Oh, my gosh.
So I guess, I'm embarrassed that I was once embarrassed, but by the time I was in high school, they were a tremendous source of my identity, cultivation or formation.
Yeah.
And so was that place.
Right.
And so
be specific. Where in Tennessee was this?
So the history of my family on my father's side was of people coming here either to Virginia or South Carolina in the 18th century. Gradually settling in Appalachia for generations. And then around the turn of the 19th century, moving a little westward. So my grandparents were born and raised. My father was born there in Wayne County, Tennessee.
Okay.
It's a small, very sparsely populated, somewhat impoverished, somewhat racist, mostly white place.
So interestingly, I think, when I asked you, where do you come from, your answer was not necessarily where you come from, but where your people come from. And I find that really interesting. And it says a lot about how you think about place, right?
It exactly does.
Yeah.
I think... my book is called Southern Migrants, Northern Exiles. I think that was a personal title for me, too.
Yeah.
I think my grandparents not only felt as if they were exiles. I sometimes felt like that. My dad didn't. He was very happy not to be a Southerner. Or
in Indiana, northern Indiana, So exiled from Tennessee is what you're saying.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
I can remember in high school, because I lived in a northern urban ethnic place, sitting around the lunchroom, and Mike Andrzejewski is saying, well, I'm Polish.
Yeah.
And some other kid named Mike Nagy says, well, I'm Hungarian.
Right.
And some other kid with the last name Bartolini says, well, I'm proudly Italian,
Yeah.
beating his chest.
Uh-huh.
What are you, Barry? And I had no answer.
Yeah.
I had no answer. And that was, that I still remember it viscerally.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I mean, the way people identify themselves and the places they carry with them throughout their lives, right? Even though, the person who said they're from Italy probably had never been to Italy,
No.
right? But had this pride of place that they were Italian.
Yeah.
But yours was different, and you felt somehow... how did you feel about that? Did you feel like to say I'm from Tennessee wasn't sufficient, or?
I didn't have an answer.
Yeah.
But I felt deficient. So why was Mike, who was Polish and had a name that I could never spell correctly,
many
had all those
consonants.
consonants.
I grew up in the Chicago area, so
Yeah,
I know about Polish people.
Polish,
Yeah.
Belgian,
Lithuanian.
Italian,
Yep.
Serb, that. And I didn't think to say WASP,
Yeah.
but that would not have
That wouldn't have fit, right?
at all,
No. Yeah.
not have characterized me.
What would, though? What would characterize where, or maybe you can't do it, but how do you characterize that place where you sort of root yourself?
I think it's a spiritual and cultural hearth. And the interesting thing about that place is it's not only is it in the South, it's in the flyover. We can talk about the flyover.
Yeah.
It's a place that if I took you there, you'd say, Chad, what the heck is going on here? Why is this place is so meaningful to you? Why? You would ask me that. And I don't know that I'd have too much of a convincing answer. I remember taking my kids when they were in middle school, and I saw their eyes in the back seat, looking around, kind of shocked. And I asked our daughter, who was the oldest, so what do you think about this place? And she paused for a moment and with sincerity said, I'm really glad Grandpa left this place. It broke my heart.
Sure. Yeah.
And they will never, well, they did go back recently, but they'll never.
So what was
go
your
back.
daughter seeing? That
Poverty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Despair. Lack of population, a very sparsely populated place. Not all that attractive.
Yeah.
Hopeless in some ways, I think she thinks.
Yeah, and clearly that though you had felt some pride from being there, or at least some deep connection.
I think it's deep connection, it's reverence, it's relationships, it's memory, it's history, it's place of origin. It's all those hard to define, nebulous kinds of attachments.
Yeah.
It's like my mother. My mother was raised in Gary, Indiana.
Yeah.
And she graduated in, 1959.
That's a place that I know a little bit.
She was very proud of going to Gary Emerson High School and the great education that she had.
Well, at the time, in the 50s, Gary, Indiana was a thriving place.
Thriving place. My grandfather worked at U.S. Steel, made good money.
Yeah, a lot of people did.
But she was very proud of growing up in Gary. And now it's, it conjures up certain images.
Yeah. So your journey, and I want to get more into your sort of more your ideas, your concepts about place and how they have manifested themselves in your work. But so your family migrates up to northern Indiana. You wind up at Notre Dame. And that's a major based on what you're talking about where your people come from in Tennessee, that's a big leap, basically in one generation, to go from rural poverty to, this hallowed institution of higher learning. What was that like for you?
You sound like a nascent Irish fan, Tim.
No, that'll take a long time for me to become a Notre Dame fan. But all kidding aside, like, how did that feel walking onto that campus?
I think that's the very reason I went there, because it had a mystique, not just regional.
Were you raised
national.
Catholic?
No.
No. Okay.
That's another reason why I went there.
Yeah.
I wanted to challenge my preconceptions. But I certainly it was attractive to go there because to my grandparents, it meant the complete manifestation in some ways of the reason why they left a place that meant so much to them. And, my father went on to become a school teacher, so he was the first generation in that side of the family. I went on to get a PhD. They were tremendously proud, and that lured me there.
Yeah.
Even though I really didn't fit in so much.
Right. Yeah.
But my faculty loved me.
But academically, you probably did. Like, you probably thrived
absolutely.
there academically. Yeah.
And my faculty, again, loved me because I wasn't the typical,
entitled.
I wasn't the typical wealthy kid from Chicago or Boston or LA or something.
Yeah. So and then you at Notre Dame you majored in history, right? You studied history,
American Studies.
American Studies. Okay. And what influence did all of this you're talking about, the sense of place and your sense of connection to Tennessee, that must have influenced your choice of sort of academic study in some way?
Totally did. It
Yeah.
all came together with an advisor who was a folklorist.
Okay.
Her name was Barbara Allen. She grew up in California, like the ballad.
Folklorist named Barbara Allen. That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Can't make that up, right?
She was a Californian, came to Notre Dame to teach, was my advisor. Her husband at that time was an eminent oral historian and folklorist who was from Kentucky and taught most of his career at Western Kentucky University. He was on sabbatical my senior year and went to Notre Dame to teach, to, be closer to Barbara. And that was just the gel of Barbara and Linwood. His name was Linwood Montel. That was just the coming together. I really wanted to study Appalachian regionalism and folklore, folk culture. And I was accepted at Penn in a famous folklore program, but it was much more international at that time, and it just didn't fit me in UCLA, and I ended up going to Western and was Linwood's student at Western.
Yeah. That's amazing. And
so it all came together with the nascent identity formation that I was talking about as a high school kid and then college student. It all came together.
Yeah.
And 10, 15 years later, I wound up at a place like Berea.
Right.
It's unimaginable.
Yeah. We can talk more about that. But it is interesting how you wind up here at a place where we're sort of this is like the gateway to Appalachia, I would describe it as, Berea, Kentucky, and a place that's rich in history and such a deep sense of place and meaning here. So no surprise that you're here, right? So we've talked about this journey you've made. Talk a little bit more about your sort of a concept of place. You mentioned three things: place, placelessness, and displacement. I'm going to lisp as I said that right. The tongue twister. Say a little bit more about that. Why is all of that so meaningful to you?
I admire people who have a deep, deep sense of place, of connection, of kinship, of belonging, of knowing, of being known, feeling at home, being in community, knowing your way around. It's bound up in a number of different academic disciplines because as an American Studies person, I was an interdisciplinarian. It's about mindfulness
Yeah.
of the power of place and attachment. And I don't know that I really had it deeply in a way that I admire it in others.
Yeah.
I had it from afar,
Right.
either to Scotland, where my mother's family was from, or England, or Tennessee, or earlier than that, deep in Western North Carolina, for example.
So, not to get too maudlin here, but I do hear sort of a sense of loss as you talk about that, and I feel very much the same way. Where I grew up in the Chicago area, and I grew up in a neighborhood where my mom had grown up, and my grandparents lived half a block away, and my father grew up in a town was just a mile away. So there was this deep sense of belonging, like you said. People knew me, I knew them, and so growing up in the Chicago area, there was, for me at least, exactly what you're describing, this deep sense of place and of belonging somewhere. And then I went away to college, and I never came back. And for good reasons. We don't have to get into all that, but no regrets. But there is this sense of, wow, that's a place that I'm connected to in a deep way. That's kind of been lost to me a little bit, and I find that really sad. Do you have similar thoughts and feelings?
Completely have similar feelings.
Yeah.
I just had to study and nurture and cultivate understanding what the power of having a sense of place means to people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's deepened my own identity and I think my own humanity and empathy and all those other kinds of things, including places that are disparaged by others. And that's an interesting thing, too, about how we judge places. But I think, Silas House, our friend and colleague, says you can't know a place without loving it and hating it and feeling everything in between. And, our daughter, when she said, "I'm glad Grandpa left this place," epitomizes that.
Right.
Counterbalanced with my attachment and reverence for it.
Sure. And I don't think you can claim ownership or connection to a place without, like you're saying, embracing all of it, right? Or understanding all of it, or being aware of all of it, not just the beauty and the vibrancy, but other things too, which certainly Chicago is filled with its own problems.
Yeah.
But that has to be part of your understanding of a place, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So talk a little bit more about how this idea, these concepts have expressed themselves in your work, whether it's your writing or your teaching or, that kind of thing.
Well, so I focused my eventual vocation on Appalachia. The great poet James Steele says Appalachia is the earth loved more than any earth. That may not be true, but I think it's true to Appalachian
In his mind,
folks.
it is, right? Yeah.
And I was deeply moved by that over the weekend, reading some more of his poetry. I just think that studying, living close to, learning about, understanding a place like Appalachia is just so interesting to what it does for the people whom you are getting to know and learning about, but also what it does to you.
Yeah.
And, Appalachia is the most misunderstood place in America. You've heard me say that. The people are so misunderstood, but they're full of complexity like all of us. And it's just a deeply human endeavor that I think if I'm hopeful, it helps and enlightens them if we get it right.
Yeah.
And it changes us in the process.
I think it's interesting because here I am too in this part of the country, and I've often said to people, if you told me 5 years ago that I'd be living in Kentucky, I would have said, you need to have your head examined. But here we are, and we love this place. And year ago or so, went on the Appalachian tour, which is a sort of a week-long bus tour of all kinds of places, which you know well, in Appalachia. And it was really my first experience of a deep dive into this region. And I also was just struck by, first of all, the beauty of the place, but also the complexity of it. And it's hard to wrap your head around what it's all about, unless you're from here, maybe. And before we left Silas' house, which you mentioned before, talked to the whole group because he's from that region, and he used this word complexify, which I think he made up, maybe. But what he meant by that is, as you're going on this journey, think about all the complexities and let them come in. Doesn't mean you have to understand them, but you have to be open to them. And I actually wrote about that a little bit after the trip, and I think that idea is just so crucial to understanding a place.
It is. I used to lead that. I once led that tour for 5 years, and I always asked people to at least be open-minded enough to unlearn what they think they knew about the people and the place that they were encountering. And it's similar to Silas's use of complexify. Not just the good things, but the troubling things that you might see. But unlearn what you've been taught.
Yeah.
Pretty explicitly,
right?
Sometimes implicitly.
Like you're saying, there's so many stereotypes associated with Appalachia, the region. So what are, for you, what are some of the kind of markers? You talked about the markers of a place. So what are some of the markers of this region that people should sort of understand?
I think they need to understand that deep attachment to place. Again, my family narrative is not about arriving at a place and living in a place so much as it is leaving a place. I remember my great-grandmother talking about, who grew up in the Scottish borders, when she lived with us for a time, how much she was kind of forced out, but also had this lament that you've identified in me. We left, I didn't really have connections to family members on my father's side that left Western North Carolina because they were long gone. But my grandparents had this, feeling of loss of having to leave it. And I think that also typifies people who live in the mountains. It's, sometimes people ask, well, why would people want to stay there, for goodness sake? There's floods and it's impoverished and it's this and that. Why on earth? Why don't they just, the implication is, why don't they just become wealthy and suburban like all of us?
Right.
And I would say, oh, you mean, and placeless.
Right. Well, So I love this idea of thinking about placelessness a little bit. And one thing I think about a lot is there are so many places now in the United States where you could be anywhere.
So true.
Driving down a avenue where every sort of fast food chain is on either side. There's maybe car dealerships. There's maybe a mall and lots of strip malls, and there's really no place. There's no marker, as you're saying, of a specific place, and you really could be anywhere. And there's places near here that are like that. We're in Kentucky, and you and I know there's streets you can drive down that feel just like that. And yet, a couple miles away, there's some incredible, landscape that you could really feel connected to. So, and I feel like I just hope that our entire country does not become this kind of placeless boulevard. Do you think you must think about that a lot?
I think about it all the time.
Yeah.
I travel a lot now in this capacity, and so I'm always marveling at how, wait a minute, am I in Kansas City?
Right.
Or am I in Dallas?
Right.
But when I'm in Tucson or Charleston or New Orleans, I don't ever think I'm in Indianapolis or
Right.
or Columbus, Ohio. I
Right.
know I'm in
You're in a place.
Charleston.
Yeah.
I'm in a place.
Yeah.
And if I'm in Eastern Kentucky.
So why is that? I mean, this is a simple question, but it's maybe hard to define. But if you think about, and I completely agree with you, I could name other places too. I've been, Santa Fe, New Mexico comes to mind, in the States, right? New Orleans is another one, where you're sort of kind of always aware of there's this place and it's different from any other place. What are the markers of that? Why do you feel that way about, say, New Orleans?
Because it's different. It's like we recognize the Golden Arches precisely because we know we're always going to get the same kind of
Right.
lousy
Yeah.
meal, but it's always going to be the same. Or, Holiday Inn was famous for that early in the 50s.
It's actually a selling point, right?
It
Yeah.
is excellent. It's
Yeah.
known. It's known
Right.
to us.
I know what I'm going to get.
However bad it is,
Yeah.
it's known.
Yeah.
And I think we take comfort in that.
Sure.
But New Orleans or Charleston or Santa Fe or Tucson, they're just different. And it's not surprising that they're great tourist attractions because I think people are hungry for this standardization that we've seen from mass culture and throughout the beginning of the 20th century.
Yeah.
It's and I think, Appalachia is in opposition of that.
Right.
Why do we love Asheville? Why do we love Asheville? Why do we just pass by Newport, Tennessee, which is, as the crow flies, not very far, but never a place, hardly, that people would want to go to. So it says so much about Americanization and mass culture and what people think they want, which is why when they, a Chicagoan comes down I-75 and stops in Berea, Kentucky, it's so wonderful. They can meet all these, they can meet these students from Appalachia and they can buy a handmade egg basket or an authentic Appalachian quilt, not to put on the bed, but to put behind the couch.
Hang on the wall, right.
For a conversation piece.
Yeah. Yeah.
We want to commodify a distinctive culture. That sounds highfalutin, but
no, I hear you. I hear you. And that's a double-edged sword, right? I mean, I think we all do some of that. For instance, my wife and I have collected lots of pottery over the years from different places that we like to have in our house and say, I know where I got that. I know where I got that. It's not our culture. It's somebody else's. So.
But it serves as a connection and a relationship and most of all a memory.
Memory of an experience, right? A place you've been. And so I really want to hear more about how all of this expresses itself either in your academic work or in your teaching. I think we'd love to hear more about that.
I think it helps in my interaction with students in terms of fostering a sense of belonging. I'll say, Tim, where are you from? And Tim, if Tim is an Appalachian student, will say, oh, I'm from Eastern Kentucky.
No, they'll tell you what county they're from.
Well, eventually.
I'm from Clark County, or I'm from Pike County,
But I zero down. I keep zeroing down because Pike County is the biggest county in Kentucky. That doesn't tell me much.
Right.
Where are you from? And eventually I get them down to the holler if they're from the country. And I say, oh, I've been there. And here's this person, faculty member with a northern accent. And the student looks at me like, you're joking, you're bluffing me, you're pulling my leg. Or if I say, if I see a person and a student from Africa, and I say, where are you from? Oh, I'm from Ghana. Well, Hotasane. And I say that in Twi, and they just
they're blown away.
Fall over. I could knock them over.
Right.
I think and I say, I've been to Kumasi. I love Kumasi. I think that's part of me evoking and recognizing and honoring a sense of place because they've packed up. They're exiles. Pike County's 100-ish miles, but it may as well be 1,000 miles.
Right.
to come to Berea.
Sure.
And so that's a sense of welcome and Berea's radical hospitality.
Yeah. When we first moved here, I literally think it was the first week we were here. I was walking on campus and a young man stopped to say hello, and I asked him, "Where are you from?" Just like you do. And he mentioned some place in Kentucky that at the time it was Eastern Kentucky, but I didn't really know where he was exactly talking about. And I did a very dumb thing. And I said, "You don't sound like you're from there," which I shouldn't have said, but that opened a whole conversation. And he actually looked at me in the eye and he said, I try to sound like I'm not from there because I think if I sound like I'm from there, that I won't belong, I won't fit in, or people will think I'm stupid.
Exactly.
And I just, oh my God, I felt so terrible. First of all, asking the question, which I shouldn't have asked, but it did open up this conversation. I still see this young man and we chat. He's a really nice kid. But that idea of place, he's like, I'm in a new place and I have to leave my old place behind because they may not accept me here.
And even he was taught about his accent.
Yeah.
Usually by an 8th grade teacher or something, to say, Tim, the sooner you lose that, you're a smart kid, but the sooner you lose that country accent, the better off you'll be.
Yeah.
Which is why that's so juxtaposed against somebody like Silas House, who has this great accent that he's not going to change.
No, right. Yeah. So I know you've been involved in this project where you sort of were kind of mapping the region, the Appalachian region. Talk a little bit about that.
So if you go to Appalachia, which, by the way, was named and coined by a student, not from the region, but from Azerbaijan, because at Berea he was in the class, and he was learning along, and he said, oh my gosh, what we're learning in this class that I taught with Jan Pierce, I see that place, that region in Azerbaijan. And so we're going to call it, this website, Apple, APPAL, maps.org. He says, no, I think you should call it Appalachia.
Brilliant.
And it was so brilliant.
It just worked, yeah.
So you grew up in Chicago, so you probably know that Robert Maynard Hutchins was the longtime president of University of Chicago, but his father at the same time was president of Berea College.
Oh, I did not know that connection. Okay.
And so, I can imagine the Chicago president coming to Berea, hanging out in the president's home, having a conversation. Dad, we are creating this great books program at the university, and I really think that you should do it at Berea.
So the Berea president was the dad of the University of Chicago president, or the other way around?
No.
Okay, he was interesting. Yeah. I did not know that connection.
Yeah. So William J. Hutchins, the father, said, okay, I think that's a good idea. And then by 1948, Berea had its own version.
Right.
And one of those classes was called Man and the Humanities.
Okay.
And every student had to take it first year eventually. Right. And it ran from 1948 until the 80s. And it eventually the name was changed. But the idea was you did a rotation in music.
Yeah.
Let's see, music, humanity, literature, and visual arts.
Yeah.
On the first day of the visual arts component, students were given an assignment to draw their home community.
Okay.
Now, the faculty member in me could talk about how interesting a pedagogy that was for the first year experience. And it is. But the miraculous thing was that Dorothy Tredenik and Les Pross, the faculty who created it, saved every one of these 7,000 drawings.
Wow.
So that when I came to Berea in 2006, Les wrote me a letter and said, I have something you might be interested in.
Yeah.
And when I saw him, he started showing me these drawings.
Yeah.
And that led to Appalachia.org.
And you can see them all still, right, at that website.
You can see
They're
them.
all there.
You can see the ones for Appalachia. We have drawings from students from Tehran.
All over, right.
From Havana. From Peking.
Yeah.
I'm using the words common at the time because...
It's interesting, too, how the kids interpret that assignment of draw where you're from, Some of them, it's their house and maybe the creek in the back. Some of it's a whole town.
Well,
some
the
of it's a
interesting-
mountainscape. Like, yeah.
And sometimes it was gendered.
Yeah.
So if you were a woman in 1950s, a young woman, your world was much more constrained typically than your older brother who could draw a 30,000-foot map.
Yeah.
So these were mental maps. But think about, we were talking about lament.
Mm-hmm.
Think about coming to Berea from wherever you were from.
Yeah.
And getting, you're probably a mixture of homesickness, exhilaration, loss,
Right.
whatever,
Yeah.
displacement, placelessness, with this sense of place. And this faculty member asks you to draw your home community.
Very cool.
So you go home and you spend hours on this. And the interesting thing is, because of surface mining and other kinds of things, some of these places literally are no longer on the landscape because they've been scraped away, excised away.
Yeah. I had a very similar experience when I went to college, different from what an Appalachian kid would have. But so I go to college from Chicago to the East Coast, and I would say majority of the people I ran into, they knew Chicago was a city, but they had no idea where it was. They didn't have any sense of the geography of America, or of the importance of Chicago as a place in America. It really bugged me. Like, I had this huge chip on my shoulder about it. People could see it.
They just didn't care.
They didn't care. But I had this I got over it, but I had this huge chip on my shoulder about it for like probably the first year. And like you said, I felt this sense of loss, of displacement, of what am I doing here? Kind of thing.
Who am I?
Who am I? Right. Am I a Midwesterner? Am I a East Coast person now? What am I? Who am I?
What do I aspire to be?
Exactly. So I just can't imagine how a young man or woman growing up in a holler in Kentucky feels like when they wind up somewhere that just is so unlike where they're from.
My grandmother used to tell the story of such sadness when they were in South Bend and Mishawaka looking for a place to rent, no money. And there would be a sign that said for rent, and where the place where you put your phone number or something, it said no hillbillies.
Yeah.
It just tore her up.
I can't believe that.
It just tore her up.
Yeah. So I'm trying to bring this all together in some way, and I don't know if we can. It's such a big topic. It's such a big subject, and it's such a fun conversation, an interesting conversation. But I guess what I'm thinking about is, here we are, and you and I are, I think, an interesting generation that sort of bridges people who were in a place for a really long time, probably, and either immigrated or had to move somewhere else. I think of my 85-year-old mother has never lived more than about 5 miles from where she was born her whole life. And so that's her place. I mean, she's never going to leave. Like, she's lived there her whole life. And she will always. And, but I think that's more and more rare, right? That's a much rarer thing today. You and I have both left the place we're from, and most people I know have as well, because careers are mobile. You have to move for a job, that kind of thing. So I don't want to necessarily lament the loss of place, but think about ways that we can bring it back and capture it and feel such that deep connection that maybe we felt when we were younger, instead of just sort of, being nostalgic and saying, oh, it was so much better back in the day, right? So what do you think about that? Like, do you have any hope for the sort of, reestablishment of connection to place in America?
Not too much.
Yeah.
Not surprising.
No, I'm not.
I'm being maudlin.
Yeah.
And a little flip.
Yeah.
I would want to be critical of technology. Ted Ralph, who is a geographer, talks about how technology has exchanged depth of place experience for breadth of place experience. Think about that. That means You get on social media and you can experience a scene in Alaska, or you can watch a film, or you can, you can get on an airplane and suddenly you can be in wherever. And I think especially for social media, it's really just, it can connect people, but I think for place, it really damages and increases the feeling of both placelessness, because social media is placeless.
Right.
It's really placeless in spite of all those.
It's in your pocket.
I can go on and get something about a site on the Scottish borders.
Yeah.
But we're losing our depth
Yeah.
of place experience, something that that's how we started this conversation.
Yeah, and I hate to come across as sort of grumpy old men, right? Sort of, lamenting that how the past was better than it is now. But I do think there's, and you mentioned this to me before, people are just not aware of place in the same way, or you use the word mindless. There's sort of the mindlessness about place or your connection to place. That's one of the reasons I think being here in Kentucky has been so interesting for us, because there is such a connection to place here.
Absolutely.
It is so strong. And I don't think people get it unless you actually come here and meet people and understand this connection to this region. I agree. It's a lot about technology. And also, you can get anywhere so quickly now, right?
But can you? It's not really there.
Right. Yeah. No, I don't mean like on your phone. I just mean in an airplane or.
That's what I mean too.
Yeah.
But I don't know how Gertrude Stein, when there's nothing there.
That is exactly what was in my head.
But I'm not. I think that's a breadth of experience that Ralph is talking about, but not much depth at all.
Yeah, and I've been to, like you're saying, places that are very distinct and very different. Like Venice, Italy, for instance. So there's no place like it, right? It's its own thing. It's unique, and yet. Sometimes I visited there, it was probably 10 years ago now, but sometimes I would stop and say, this place feels almost like it's a theme park. Do people really live here?
Yeah.
And if they do, wow, how do they do that, or is it just now a place where people visit because of its uniqueness, right? And those are thorny questions, but finding those places that are not like others and that you can feel a deep connection to is something I think we'll all pursue.
It roots us.
Yeah.
When James Still writes about the earth loved more than any earth, that rooted him. And he wasn't particularly from Eastern Kentucky himself. He was from Alabama.
Yeah.
But he too discovered how rooted and connected and related and could know a place and a people through a lifetime of commitment there. And I just am about to live in Berea longer than I've lived any other place. And I think that living in Berea it's been a culmination really of being 7 years old and wanting to go with my grandparents back to Tennessee to see Aunt Cornelia, who was hospitalized, or go to a funeral.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Chad. This has been a great conversation. I think that's a good place to sort of wrap this up. And so go to Mappalachia.org. You can see these really cool maps that kids drew of the places where they're from. Chad's book, tell them about the book they should read by Chad Berry.
Oh, I think you should read Southern Migrants, Northern Exiles.
Okay. And give us one sentence. What's it about?
23 million people, white people who were born in the South and Appalachia, left it in the 20th century, along with 8 million African Americans and 1 million native-born Latino Hispanic people, and moved.
Okay.
We have been a country based on mobility and migration, and I think that's the bigger
changing one place for another.
For
all the time.
placelessness
Yeah.
and lament.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really great. I really enjoy this conversation. It's been a little bit of a departure from the other shows I've done so far, but this is great. This moving in this more sort of conceptual concept conversation, and there's nobody better to do it with than you. So I really appreciate this. I appreciate your time. If you want to know about place, if you want to know about Appalachia, come to Berea, Kentucky, and we'll show you what it's all about. So thank you so much, Chad, for being here today.
Thank you, Tim.